about swords? He can't possibly be serious. Yeah, he must be out of ideas. Not only am I serious, I'm also the Wolverine. Just kidding. This was a viewer requested top 5, and I actually really like the idea because I've been a big proponent of melee at Nerf Wars ever since we started doing it in Florida. And that's a pretty good story, and actually has a lot to do with why I'm pretty comfortable holding them like this. So, once upon a time, and this is way back in our way back machine, these were pretty popular, and they were also pretty cheap. You could find them on Walmart on sale every once in a while, and our Walmart down in Statesboro, Georgia, back during the dorm room days, had a big sale where you could actually buy them for $1. And so we bought probably eight or nine of them for $1 at the time. And that was pretty good. We shared a few with friends, and then I remember keeping about 5. Some of these are the original 5 that I had, like this one has clearly been eaten by Ghost, but they're in decent... They're not in decent shape at all. But I used to use these during pistol rounds. EOC and I would play wingman pistol rounds, and it got to the point where pistols were so balanced that using melee weapons was actually a really good way to get around the slow reload of flipping a speed loader and pulling with a knife finder. And that was pretty much all anybody used at the time. So after I figured out that I could use melee weapons instead of reloading and just run really fast to close gaps, I figured out pretty quickly that if my opponent turned and ran to try and reload and take another shot at me, it was pretty easy to just flip them at people like so. And so these are actually our honorable mentions. These are anything from the Shadow Fury to the Vantage Sword to the Thunder Fury, etc. And even the modern Zombie Strike foam sword uses the same sort of style of soft blade, plastic hollow core, and they have the same as the Vantage Fury in their markers. But these are honorable mention. They're the catch-all. If you've had a Nerf sword in the last 6 or 7 years or so, you've probably seen one in this model. They weigh very little, they're pretty safe, and they're a ton of fun. They're also relatively inexpensive. So our honorable mention are all the swords that follow this basic design model and get chewed by pets pretty easy. Let's move on to number 5. So launching into our top 5 melee weapons of all time, we have this. This is the Stonewall Dagger. Now it came in a set called the Stonewall Shield and Dagger, and this is one of my favorites, and it's one of my favorites because I had 3 of them. This is the only one that remains to me. It's got a few nicks in the front, but it's basically weightless, and it's not particularly well balanced for throwing, but it throws very nicely. Now the other really great advantage to it is that they cost me nothing in terms of finger space to hold, because I would always tuck them into the back pocket of my shorts. That meant that even during primary rounds, I would always have the ability to, instead of barrel tapping people and instead of shooting people inside 20 feet or so, I could always just pull and throw. The Stonewall Dagger cost nothing. It was really simple, and it's very safe to throw. It's completely foam covered and so weightless that it's very safe. It also throws relatively straight within those first 15 feet or so before it kind of goes wonky. I really liked the Stonewall Dagger a ton. I still really enjoy them, and I wish that they were still on shelves today, and that's why it's number 5. Let's move on to number 4. It's a little bit more familiar to most of you. So number 4 on our list would actually be number 1 on a certain Nerf Vikings list, but this is the Warlock AX, and it's a relic of days gone by, and it's actually the only thing on our list that isn't a sword type weapon, but this is pretty sweet. Now it's a 2-handed axe, like that's a ton of real estate down here. Again, completely foam coated, but it's got that very strange, very kind of thick foam coating on the outside where this is quite hard. Like, there are some stories that I could tell you that I probably shouldn't, but I'll tell you one. There was a guy on my HVZ squad who once got pretty aggro at a mission, and this is like during the dark/golden days of HVZ, and this has a lot of surface area on it. So in addition to just being a really good axe for melee weapons, where it kind of collapses, you can see there, this is folding in on impact. So it's relatively safe as long as it's used in the spirit that's intended, because this is a large collapsible region here that gives you a lot of buffer. But the unfortunate thing is said very strong HVZ player once took it like this, and if you use the full flat of it, I'll let you guys use your imagination to fill in the rest of the story, but but it was hilarious because it didn't happen to me. That's the Warlock AX. It's super tough. It's part of like kind of a matched pair with our number one, but we'll talk more about that later. I personally, and a lot of other like Southeast Nerfers, really dug these melee weapons that had the slightly more solid core on the outside. Are they safe? Absolutely not. Are they a ton of fun? 100%. And you can do some like serious damage to cardboard armor with them, which has its own advantages, and that's another story for another time. Number 3 on our list, however, is brand new. Very, very cool. So number 3 on our list is very, very new. They were debuted last year at Toy Fair, and it was an absolute pleasure to get to work with them this year. I love the Spark Foam Katanas. They are very, very spicy. Don't you mean slicey? Not funny. Hilarity aside, the Spark Foam Katanas come in 2 versions, the Deluxe and the Basic. The Deluxe is designed more or less for like kendo-style sparring, and forgive me if I've got that wrong, but they do have foam blades and they're definitely not lethal, yet they are sharp, and they have a very thin blade profile, and their core is actually quite hard. Now, the other one has very similar properties, but this has a plastic sort of hilt here and hand guard. I'm sure those have like actual names like Suba or something, but I'm just not a katana guy. Sorry, friends. However, the basic model is far more friendly, complete with a foam hand guard and pommel down here and full handle. They're actually technically completely foam coated. The blades are also much thicker and cushier, as you can see, and they have collapsible regions on the side and up here in the front. They also take abuse pretty well. You can see that this one's been scarred up from a variety of SE&C battle, but they're relatively inexpensive. You can get them for about 20 United States dollars on Amazon, and they've become quite popular in the SE&C. As long as you're not swinging wildly, they're actually pretty fun. They let you get very quick cuts in, some rather sharp maneuvers, and they really just last a very long time. So they're not quite as cheap as the cosplay stuff, and yet they are not as expensive as some of these vintage melee weapons that cost quite a lot. For instance, the Warlock AX is like up to $60 on eBay, and that's not even to say what our number 1 costs. But the Spark Foam Katanas are a welcome addition. I can't wait to see more from them this year at Toy Fair, and I like them a lot. They're a fun flavor that we didn't have offered in the Nerf kind of lineage, so I wanted to include them in our Melee Top 5 list because we really don't have any Asian weapons in the Hasbro line. We've got a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff and a ton of European flavors, but nothing like this. So let's move on to number 2, which is kind of Star Wars-y. I think this is the wrong look for this. So I'm sorry that I don't have a Sith outfit for you guys, but this has always been one of my favorites, and that's what puts the Vendetta Sword at number 2. Now, cool force tricks aside, this has always reminded me of Darth Maul's lightsaber, and with good reason. It is a double-bladed, very long foam sword-style melee weapon, and it's pretty clear that I never did any baton twirling. However, it does have a very cool button recessed in the female sort of section of the sword, and if you give it a quick push here and a twist, it slides into 2. Now sadly that means that you lose the full foam coating of the blade, but it's pretty awesome that it doubles as the longest Nerf brand melee weapon of all time, and believe me, I've seen so many people wield this, like holding the sword and just like swinging essentially a maybe 5 foot long sword with like chunky middle. It's designed, of course, to be used as a double-bladed sort of weapon. Oh, the GIFs are going to be terrible from this. I like to call them GIFs. But the cool feature is, of course, that you can turn it into a dual-bladed weapon, and this is very, very neat. They're both relatively the same size as the Vantage Swords or the Shadow Furies or what have you, and they are very maneuverable. Then the pommel being plastic doesn't really get in the way, but I like that they have the ability to be played with in 2 separate ways. This is kind of a precursor to like a lot of toys like the Modulus that can be used in slightly different ways, and I think that that is really, really neat. The adapters twist twist back together just as easy for more spinning fun, but I like the Vendetta a lot. Sadly though, they are getting old. If you can find them at Toys R Us, and I have seen them at Toys R Us still, I think that they're a pretty good buy, especially if you like melee weapons. But over time, as they've sat in kind of heat and moisture, the blades themselves do split. So as opposed to others which seem to have largely solid construction, this is the only Nerf sword that I've seen that started kind of warping itself apart. And that's a real tragedy. I would love to have a mint set of these again, but now is not the time. In the meantime, let's talk about our number one, which is of course my personal favorite. So number one is the Marauder. The Marauder is great because it has that same sort of very stiff foam that the Warlock AX does. You can see there just how little compressibility that it has. The tip was also very strong. This one's seen a lot of damage and has only really suffered a few bumps and scrapes, and it had a pretty powerful handguard that would allow you to swing quite powerfully if your opponent also had a Marauder, and it could stop most blows. Now sadly, over time it's become very, very difficult to find one of these in great condition. You can see the paint on the pommel is chipping, the blade has plenty of scratches and dings on it, and the big thing that you find with these when you buy them off eBay or find them at thrift stores is that you get some weakening in the foam here and here. That's because there's nothing going through the crossguard to actually strengthen it and reinforce. So sometimes these get torn off, at which point this becomes way less fun. So clearly inspired by like a two-handed greatsword or maybe a bastard sword, hard to say, but this is my absolute favorite. It fits my body very well because it's not as heavy as one of these swords, so somebody with less physical strength can in fact wield it quickly, and it's got plenty of length and it doesn't bend. That is to say that when it comes into contact with something else, it tends to hold fast and doesn't flex, so that you can actually use it for stopping power against heavier melee weapons, particularly like actual LARP buffers, and then it's stiff enough that you can frequently slip it through shields and what have you. But I like it a lot, and then the best thing about it is, admittedly, and I don't do this anymore because I've grown up and I realize that it's just not that safe, but these threw so well. You could throw one of these 50 feet accurately, easily, and when it's spinning, you get a full like 3 feet of actual coverage to hit people with. So I got a lot of ranged melee tags with my Marauder swords. In fact, I did a goofy range test on the Toy Lab that I'll link in the description box below, where I jokingly chucked the Marauder down range a few times, but it's a ton of fun. It gives you all the fun feelings of being like one of King Arthur's knights, and it's just a very effective melee weapon that didn't get damaged over time. So the largest thing that the Marauder had going for it was actually itself. It's a quite large boffer type weapon, but the best thing that it had going for it was in fact its value. At under 20 United States dollars, and most retailers were selling them for around 18, it's really stood up to the test of time. They don't even sell for twice that on eBay. You can get 3, maybe 4 times that out of them on the interwebs, on the secondhand market right now, and that's because they're really cool. They're very in demand. I can never find the red ones. I would kill for a mint condition red Marauder, but I do have 2 of the black ones, and they both stood up relatively well to the point that they're still very usable at SE&C Wars, and I like them a lot. I think that they're great. They're very easy to hand to people, and in terms of like what you would pay for a boffer of this quality, 20 bucks was a steal. They're crazy. So thank you very much for watching. I know that no one's going to agree with this list exactly, because the LARP guys are going to get in here and tell me that none of these are as nice as their LARP blah blah blahs that cost hundreds of dollars, and that's fair. I've seen some incredibly detailed LARP weapons that have like liquid latex coatings and are very safe and very soft, but Nerf has really always been about like delivering value over the shelf, and none of those things have ever been sold at stores. So these are a part of my childhood, and I think that they're a part of a lot of HVZ games and other people's Nerf experiences over the years. So I kind of wanted to rank my favorites. Most of them are Nerf branded. The Spark Foam stuff is not, but there's a ton of great boffers out there. I just don't have that personal experience to bring that to you. Maybe in time we'll get to experience some of those and we can do a top 5 boffer weapons video. But in the meantime, that's my top 5 melee that are Nerf or Nerf related, and I hope you guys really enjoyed. As always, the feedback in the comment section is super duper important to me on the top 5s. I really need more top 5 ideas. I love doing these videos every Friday. They're a ton of fun. They're way different than like actually making things and tinkering with things, and the ideas are awesome. Just keep them coming. I definitely want to do top 5 mods pretty soon, and then after that I'm at a loss, so I'm going to need some help. Let me know. Much love. Nerf on, Drac out.